Welcome to Legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel, dedicated to honoring the service, stories, and sacrifices of men and women who have worn the uniform. In each episode, we sit down with veterans from all branches of the military to hear their personal accounts, unfiltered, unscripted, and unforgettable. This is Diana Mall Halstead, the Kriege's daughter. And today I am pleased to introduce to you Major Cameron Dilts, a distinguished officer in the United States Air Force. Cameron served for 12 years on active duty as a CV-22 Osprey pilot, a role that took him across the globe, from combat missions in the Middle East to joint operations with international forces. He currently serves in the Air Force Reserves and is a flight instructor at the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. Originally from Cincinnati, Ohio, Cameron didn't grow up surrounded by military influence, but was drawn to aviation from a young age. Inspired by time in the cockpit with his father, he set his sights on the Air Force Academy to the time he was 9 years old and never looked back. His story is one of determination, discipline, and deep dedication, not only for flying, but to leadership, service, and family. It is an honor to have him here with us today. Let's begin. Cameron, welcome to the Barbed Wire Hotel.
Absolutely.
To get started, what branch of the military did you serve?
In the Air Force. I was a CV-22 Osprey pilot for 12 years. Then 2 years ago, I transitioned into the reserves. And so now I'm a flight instructor at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, part-time.
Colorado Springs is a great area.
We love it here. My wife is from Denver. And so when we transitioned away from active duty and got thinking about where we wanted to raise our family, it was an easy choice.
Tell me a little bit about your family growing up.
So I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio originally. I'm, as far as I know, the first adults to leave the state of Ohio in several hundred years. So I didn't have any military influences really as a young man or as a boy, other than my grandfathers having served in World War II and the Korean War. But that was a small chapter of their life and something that they didn't talk about at all. So other than just being around them and seeing the respect they got as being combat veterans, I didn't really have any other influences to kind of steer me towards the military, but I always wanted to fly airplanes, and it seemed like the Air Force Academy was a pretty natural place to go do that and have someone pay you to do it rather than try to find your own way. Yeah.
My dad was in World War II and in the Air Force. And he loved to fly planes. So he was a waist gunner, but he was in the air.
Right. Yeah. It's, if he was in World War II as a waist gunner, I'm sure he's got 1,000 stories because those guys really, my last assignment on active duty was in England. And so we got pretty familiar with some of the bombardment groups and fighter squadrons and the history with all of that. And kind of like we had that legacy at our base and with our squadrons and kind of what we were there to do and kind of carrying that on and honor them as much as we could since we were the local resident Americans in the UK still.
What was your family like?
I was the oldest of three. I had two younger sisters, and my dad started flying planes as a hobby when I was about 4 years old. Oh. And so I grew up as his co-pilot in a small four-seat aircraft in Cincinnati, Ohio. While our family was still small in size, we would do summer vacations with, or a long weekend or something. But as we all got older, there was 5 of us, so we didn't all fit in a 4-seat airplane very long. But we made it work for a little bit. My mom stayed home with us, and he was an attorney in Cincinnati and kind of funded his passion hobby that way. So I just grew up thinking that every kid's dad had an airplane and everyone just got to zoom around to New Hampshire or Florida or whatever on a whim. It seemed normal to me.
That's a fun thing. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
No, I applied to go to the Air Force Academy as a cadet, and I kind of set my sights on that when I was 8 or 9 years old. Kind of like I mentioned, I wanted to be an aviator, and so, I didn't not enjoy going to school and playing sports, but everything was kind of a means to an end for me to get to Colorado, to get to the academy, and then go to pilot training. So that's the way I entered service. You do 4 years as a cadet, you graduate, commission as a second lieutenant, and off you go to pilot training, which for me was down to Texas.
Where did you do your cadet training?
That's at the academy in Colorado Springs. So the campus there is almost 20,000 acres, and so your first 5 weeks are basic cadet training, which is kind of like a boot camp type thing where you learn military decorum and marching, but also history of the Air Force and the academy, and kind of you start getting in the mentality of what does it mean to lead people and be an officer, in addition to just, the incredible networking you have. The older cadets that are there that have been there just for a few years, but also the folks that are teaching your math class or your glider class that I got to go to, these are all combat veterans from Desert Storm and then the early days of Afghanistan and Iraq. Some of the very first few guys doing that stuff too.
Did you go to your cadet training right out of high school? Or was it part of high school? Or
no, straight out of high school. I graduated in 2005. I left Cincinnati, and then I started. So that was end of May, early June of 2005, and then I reported to the academy on June 30th of 2005. So it was pretty quick, just getting everything together. There's not much to prepare for. You just show up, and I think I packed a toothbrush and a couple extra pairs of underwear, but they give you everything else you need. So it was just a backpack and a plane ticket, and that was it.
Jeez. And you planned this your whole life.
Yes.
So you're kind of like living your dream.
But people that know me aren't surprised when they hear that. But some people, it seems unusual to them, but not for me.
Oh, I just think that's great. That's just commendable to have this dream and then see it fulfilled. And you've been doing this since 14 years?
Yeah, I graduated in 2010. So just over 14 years, 12 years on active duty.
Wow. How much time did you spend in the United States?
All the way until my final assignment was so only the last 3 years of those 12. So it takes about 3 years to kind of go through pilot training. There's multiple phases of that. And then I ended up getting selected or going towards being assigned to the CV-22 Osprey, which takes another good chunk of time. So by the time I showed up at my first special operations squadron, where your full-time job is just flying Ospreys and getting good at that, I had been out of the academy for 3 years. So it takes a little bit of time to go through all those different schoolhouses. You can do survival training and water survival. So 3 years of training, and then I had 3 separate operational assignments in the Osprey. So I consider myself lucky to kind of have dodged the non-flying staff type assignments. So I was in a squadron for all 9 years that I was post-training. So I was in Clovis, New Mexico at Cannon Air Force Base, and then we went down to Fort Walton Beach, Florida for 3 more years, and then the last 3 in RAF Mildenhall in East Anglia, UK.
What's it like to fly the Osprey?
The Osprey is a very unique aircraft. I enjoyed it incredibly. There's a lot of public discourse, negative media, as well as positive reports, but it's just such a unique aircraft. You can fly almost the same speed as a C-130. It's not pressurized, so you don't get to quite the same altitudes, but you can basically fly like an airplane all around the world. The only limit is the pilots themselves, because you can aerial refuel and you can just keep going for hours and hours. And then you get to your destination and it can just be a clearing in the trees because you can turn your nacelles up vertically and land like a helicopter. You don't even need an airport. So some of the uses we got, it's a very expensive and complex aircraft, but when you have a target or a hostage in a situation that's far removed from any kind of infrastructure or support network that we have, or a timeline that doesn't allow you to build that out and then do it with conventional helicopters and airplanes combined, you can just take a squadron of Ospreys and go do that and then be done in less than 2 days. You've got everybody out by the time the sun rises the second time. So it was a really fun airplane to fly just in general, but then the way that we got to use it in the Air Force, some of the impact you get to make on people's lives personally because of the capabilities and the flexibility you have. It's just extremely agile. So that part was even more rewarding. So it was nice to brag that you fly an airplane that no one else has really flown before. It's a small group of people that have ever done it. And then, but on top of that too, you get airplane training, you get helicopter training. So you just get everything about being a pilot. You get a little bit of taste of everything. You combine it into an Osprey and then away you go and go all over the world.
So if you have a hostage situation or there's people in the woods or something like that, you can go in and land anywhere.
It's a tilt rotor, and the program started in the 80s. I think the first flight was 1989, somewhere right in there. And then after the Cold War ended, there, just the divestiture and kind of shrinking of the defense budget, it almost killed the program. But some of the politicians did a good job in making sure pieces of that airplane were made in every constituency across the Union. So there was a lot of political support to keep the program alive, which got it all the way to the 9/11 era, where now we've got, these little pockets of people all over the world in very remote places that are trying to do us harm. And you have an aircraft now that can basically go and get into those places and get back out in a lighter package. But the Air Force uses them. It's a Marine Corps program, and NavAir is the kind of controlling agency that is the interface between the Department of Defense and Bell and Boeing, who are the two manufacturers. And so the Marine Corps uses it one way. The Navy just started taking receipt of some aircraft, and they use it a different way. And then the Air Force purchased the aircraft to replace their MH-53s, the Pavlo, for special operations, infiltration, and exfiltration type missions. So we would all use the aircraft differently for different types of missions, but kind of lever the unique capabilities of it similarly, kind of in how we were employing all that.
Well, so since you train now, do you train Navy people and the other armed forces on how to use them, or do you only train Air Force people?
I've moved on completely where I'm doing basic flight instruction now. So I fly with cadets primarily who have never been in an airplane before. And I teach them how to land it for the first time. So I'm in a conventional training airplane that you'll see at any county airport that a doctor might fly around for his family. And so we use that and just start from day one, their exposure to aviation being kind of through a lens of, you're not just learning to fly, but you're learning how to lead and employ aircraft, to support ground troops that are in forward locations. So it's a little bit of technical instruction, but it's a little bit of mentoring and inspiring and getting them ready for what they're going to do.
And you're remembering when you were that age.
Yeah, I did the exact program when I was 18. I did the gliders first, and then as a senior at the academy, I did the powered flight program that I now teach. So, and all of this, I remember it all very vividly. It's crazy to see it come back full circle.
That's incredible. What has been the most rewarding part of your service?
For me, it took a long time to get good at flying the Osprey. I think it takes a little bit it's a longer path to being very competent and proficient in all the things that the Osprey can do, and then understanding how you fit into the special operations world and all the other different types of helicopters and fires, platforms, the types of airplanes that can shoot. There's a lot to learn about what everyone else does too, and how you fit into that puzzle safely and effectively. I enjoyed that process of having something to really hunt for and always be learning and pushing myself and kind of growing as an aviator. But then to reach that pinnacle where you're not only an instructor at home station, but when you go and deploy, you're leading a formation of 4 aircraft, but you're also engaging with all these different other military organizations and other governmental organizations to put a plan together. And that, everyone kind of has one representative for each aircraft to really build the contracts and speak for the capabilities of how we might best fit into what needs to be done. And you're standing in a room with people. It's a huge imposter syndrome. Like, how am I here? And how is anyone listening to me? But what you build ends up getting put into, kind of a very professional looking package. And it goes to the Pentagon or to the White House in some cases for approval. And then, maybe the next night you go and execute that. That part was extremely rewarding as a young man to get to do things like that fairly regularly.
I just find it incredible. I don't know about flying an airplane. My dad liked to fly. He flew them after he got out of the service, and my sister flew. But did you learn on flight simulators? The
best way to learn is just in the aircraft, hands down. And there's a debate about how much simulator you used to use, and especially some of the new technology with virtual reality, and what you can do with linking computers together. And there's definitely value there, I think, from my experience. But at the Air Force Academy in the glider, you just get into the glider and go, and you start learning in the aircraft from day one. They have since added simulators to some of that, but it's very minimal before you start flying the real thing. Same thing with the powered aircraft. I think once you get to the real pilot training, so you're not a cadet anymore, but an officer that's and your full-time job is just to learn how to fly. I want to say, probably maybe a month or so of classroom. You're sitting down, reading books and trying to conceptually understand what you're about to go do. Maybe another month-ish of simulator time where you've got, either it's I can't remember exactly all the different types we had, but they have, screens that kind of wrap around and give you a sense of having some peripheral vision. And the cockpit is mocked up just the same. Most of the buttons do exactly what they do in the airplane. So you really get a sense of, here's the exact sequence of button pushes and things I need to manipulate and go fly. But you don't have the seat of the pants feel accurately. Even in simulators that move, in my opinion, they don't quite replicate the real thing of feeling the heat of the sun and the sweat and the bumping around in turbulence and all of that. It's just, you have to go experience it and then, get your brain accustomed to tuning out all of those physical inputs that you're feeling and really focus on what you need to be doing and not how uncomfortable you are or whatever's going on.
Well, the other thing is mentally, you're sitting on the ground versus in the air.
And especially when you start going solo too, and you realize no one's going to take over and get you back home, you got to be ready to go.
Oh, wow. What was the most challenging part of all your training?
Challenging part of the training is just the amount of information that you have to memorize and internalize. The Air Force Academy, I think one of the top reasons to go, and one of the top skills I learned is just time management. You have 15,000 things to do. Not any of them are, there's some things that are more important than others, but they all kind of just feel equally important, and you just have to figure out a way to get through all of those things. And pilot training was just an extension of that. So, and I recognize that, post getting my wings, you're like, oh, I see what they were doing in this multi-year process of ramping you up for what pilot training is so much quicker than the academy experience. And you just have to be ready to hit the ground running, know when to study, know when it's time to go to sleep, and that there's no more information retention happening, and then be ready to perform the next day. So that was probably the time management and just task management of what's the most important thing that I can do now. And then, what can I push off? And that serves you well when you get to combat, because, in training, it's very regimented. The syllabus is broken down, by each event and what you're going to talk about in each event and which pages to read for that event. And then as you kind of progress out of training into the operational world, you're still doing exercises, but it's becoming a little bit less scripted. And then you get into, a situation in the Middle East or whatever, and there's no script. No one's telling you what you should do. There's no prescribed outcome. It's just, you get to make it up. And the level of preparation that you've put in for 10 years at that point determines, what the outcomes are going to be. And sometimes even then it could be outside of your control. And so you have to really, to be adaptable, but really focus in like, all right, here's all the inputs. What do I need to do now? What can wait a little bit longer? And then constantly update that, because it's always changing and the enemy gets a vote.
Wow. What was the most challenging part about your combat?
There was a couple situations. Probably the one that stands out for me was, I was at Al Assad Air Base, which is in Anbar province in Iraq. And we were given notification basically that we were going to be attacked by the Islamic Republic of Iran. And we didn't know exactly how we were going to be attacked, but it was a unique time. This was in early 2020. And so it was a different mentality. Most of what my kind of tenure and a lot of the guys I served with, we're in kind of removed bases that are relatively secure and safe. And you're really only exposed for certain periods of time on any given sortie. But at this particular time, we were told like, hey, sometime over the next 3 days, there's going to be a massive attack, and it's going to be here. And so you just have 3 to 4 days to think about what that's going to be like. Luckily, no one was killed. A lot of things in aviation are everything's normal, and then boom, it's not, and then it's over, and then it's fine again. You don't have time to dwell on something that's going to go wrong or an emergency that happens, or if you take fire, it's very short. You can't hear anything when you're flying airplanes because it's so loud. If it's not hitting you, there's no audio response or anything. But And so it comes and goes, and then you're like, oh, wow, that happened, but now it's over. But this was a long, drawn-out kind of 4-day thing where we were preparing, how do we disperse? How do we get everyone into a safe place? How do we ensure we don't completely lose an entire task force worth of helicopters and airplanes that are sitting on the ramp here? Because we don't know what types of weapons will be used or the method of the attack. It ended up being ballistic missile attacks. So from when they finally launched, and you kind of know where the target is because of capabilities the U.S. government has, you can see the trajectory, and they're all coming towards you. There's only about 3 or 4 minutes at the speed that those things are flying at to get out of the way. So you need to be prepared, because thinking about that once those things get lit off, it's a little bit too late. So that was probably the most mentally challenging for me. It was just, there wasn't anything, necessarily physical or on the aviation side too spectacular about that time, but just knowing that that's coming, and you don't know what it's going to look like. You kind of just get to ponder that, and, laying in bed at night or in the cot, really is what it was. But
when you're told that you're going to be attacked, you're concerned about you, yourself, your family, your crew. And how much do these helicopters cost?
Yeah, they're $100 million each.
Okay. So you've got all that riding on your shoulders. And they're not just your shoulders, they're the other people's shoulders too. All you guys carry the same weight, but it's like, that's a lot.
There was probably 5 minutes of, boy, I wish I wasn't here right now. And then you kind of quickly accept that there's no way to not be there anymore. And the best thing you can do, at least, for me, what I thought about was, I can't dwell on, some of these eventualities maybe that may or may not happen that I can't control. All I can do is get my guys as ready as we can be, so that our response, the time it takes us from notification to getting out of the way and or going somewhere else or whatever we need to do, is as fast as possible. And there's nothing that we're still ironing out when we get that notification. Wow. And so that's what we did for 4 days. I had my guys build basically a plan of, this airman, are going to grab these keys. We're going to label them with a blue sticker. They're going to be, these 4 people get in this truck. That truck doesn't leave until everyone is there. So our airplanes were 2 miles away from where our operations center was. So if you don't have everyone that you need in the car, or you assume they're somewhere else, they're stuck there in the target area, not on an airplane. So lots of things like that, where we completely scripted down everyone's muscle movements to make that as fast as possible. It ended up working out for us. But like you said, it was a task force of 750 people on our side of the base. And then there was other international allies that were located there too. There was an Army battalion for perimeter security. There's all sorts of people that were all doing the same thing. But our piece of the puzzle, we had to try to figure out how many people we could take out as fast as possible, get out of the way, let the attack subside, and then get ready to respond the next day.
750 people real fast.
Real fast. Yeah, we had a lot of helicopters, though, so we were able to get it done.
2 miles away.
Well, ours were 2 miles away. They were kind of all spread out. We had kind of a dispersed parking plan, so that if we weren't fast enough, we weren't, all grouped together.
So when you and your group were there and you had these other forces from other countries, did you communicate with them, or did somebody like the Pentagon or somebody communicate with them?
It really depended on your role. Mine was not one where, in that particular instance, some of them were kind of more in like they would deploy their forces to run like the hospital or something. There was some times where we worked really closely with the French and the British and some of those counter ISIS missions that we were doing. Everyone in Western Europe was very keenly interested in stopping those attacks that were happening in Europe. And so in those cases, we would work with them a little bit more closely. I would typically, as a pilot and flight lead, my liaison would be with a joint terminal air controller or, basically the soldier that has the giant radio talking to all the airplanes. And so we would have a working relationship. He would understand, generally speaking, what the Osprey can do, how many people we can take. And so they're constantly, as the mission unfolds and you're adjusting and the plan and things are changing. They kind of know, okay, if they go here, it takes that long and they can take that many people. And you kind of, that way you're not just constantly, neither one of you is constantly in the dark, where I know who's on the ground. I know where they're planning on going across the battlefield, but then they also know where we're going to be and how much fuel we have to wait and hang out and that kind of thing.
Wow.
So there were times that we were working with allies, but generally speaking, I would mostly just work with American soldiers. Yeah.
Was there anything that surprised you about any of your, I want to say time of service, but your combat time?
The most surprising thing, other than a few of those short instances like that one, it was just how much our training back home and the time we had leading up to going on a deployment, how closely that matched and replicated what we actually experienced in combat, where, at least from my perspective, I did a handful of deployments. I think it was 6 or 7. I'd have to go through my calendar, but even from the first one, and then to getting to the point where I'm leading in formations and not just being a co-pilot, I always kind of felt like I had been doing this already, even on the first time that we were flying overseas. And if not even maybe a little bit easier than the training environment, is we'd really make sure that we had in the months leading up multiple instances where if we were just internally training, we would really push ourselves. So we would try to make everything from showing up to work through all the way until the end of the mission match what we were going to be doing. There was a really professional mindset where we're here for a purpose and we're going to push ourselves as hard as we can so that if we do need to be employed, it's all second nature, if not easier than what we've pushed ourselves to do. And so I think that was the most surprising thing is it's not like the movies at all. I felt very prepared, kind of ready to go, and surprised at how it just kind of matched what these older guys had basically, very purposely, and the staff. I mean, there's huge staffs that make sure that happens, but they had been through some of it, and you learn lessons, and then you just try to make the next generation better. And so everything that you did got you ready for it.
Well, that's what I was thinking, that because of what you did in combat, it mimicked what you were trained, because the people that were training you had been in combat, so they knew how to train you.
That's the unique thing I think about my generation. I think reading about it, I'm no expert, but it just sounded like some of the middle to later years of Vietnam were the same way. But because the conflict was so long, you had guys that were going through lots of combat experience, mm-hmm. and then aging out, coming back, becoming an instructor, taking those lessons learned. And it was multiple cycles of that happening, where by the time I'm going on my first deployment in 2013, 9/11 was already 12 years ago by that point. So it was really a refined process at that point.
Wow. Now, how many times were you deployed?
I think altogether, I deployed 9 times, and sometimes those were not to the Middle East. I had one to Korea, and then went to Ukraine just before the invasion, the Russian invasion in Ukraine. So a few instances like that where it wasn't like direct action and Iraq style combat missions, but it was challenging in a different way.
When you're not deployed, are you back in the United States and then they say, okay, now you're going, or are you in England or someplace?
Yeah, we typically would be, it's evolved over time, but what it kind of typically looked like is you'd get two to three groups of crews on a cycle where you'd have time for everyone. It had to be sustainable. Like I mentioned, by the time I was even a new guy, it had been going on for so long that they recognized like people still need time for leave and, addressing family matters, maybe going to a professional education type program to further their military career and be ready for greater opportunities. And then you get done with that, you go into kind of a pre-deployment spin up. We always talked about it as a crawl, walk, run. So you do some basic type training, kind of get back into the swing of it. And then now you're walking, you're making it a little bit more complicated, a little bit faster. And then by the end of that window, you're really doing everything that you can do to make it as hard, or if not harder than what you think you're about to go do. So you know that timeline is like these 4 months. And then you might have 1 or 2 months after that to just get your affairs in order. It might be a little bit less, or you might be on the hook in an alert posture, and then generally speaking, okay, these are the 4 to 5 months that I'll be deployed for that. So the 2 squadrons that we had in the United States, in New Mexico and Florida, that was typically it was kind of a set cycle, and that it changed at times, but that was generally what we tried to do to give people predictability in order to run the marathon. In England, we were so much closer physically to where things were happening in Africa and the Middle East. We didn't have a rotation necessarily, but more of an informal string attached where you knew that call could come at any point. So we're working through those cycles as far as developing and training new guys, but we're also always, your bag is always packed. Your stuff is always organized. Everything is inventoried. We know when things need to be reordered. All of that's always ready to go because it's just, you can get that. The call can come from DC anytime.
When you enlisted or went to your cadet training, did you know that you were going to go into combat, or was there a chance you might stay in the United States and never leave?
I didn't know that at all. My goal was to be a helicopter pilot of some kind and be involved in whatever I could. Looking back on it now, it seems a little bit unwise or foolish, but I wanted to try to do the hardest thing that would get me as close to the front lines as possible. Wow. And so that's why I competed for a spot in helicopter training. So you start with an airplane, and then I got awarded the spot to go to helicopter training after that. And then from there, we have a combat rescue force too, using H-60, a modification of a Black Hawk helicopter. That's all Air Force dedicated to search and rescue. And then we have the Osprey for special operations. But even with that, there's another piece of the helicopter force in the Air Force that supports VIP movements in Washington and Tokyo, and they also move security forces around our nuclear silos in the Midwest and West. And those guys typically, on average, deploy less than the rescue forces or special operations guys, if at all. So that was always a potential to not be involved in overseas combat, but my goal was to try to get to the as far forward as I could.
You wanted the front lines. This is, I don't know if it's anything within your knowledge, but President Trump is talking about Greenland. How would that affect what you guys do?
From my time in England, when we weren't running down to Africa for a few days or something like that, we were really thinking about trying to plan what Russia would do next and what their capabilities would be in the Arctic. It's so difficult to operate aircraft in the Arctic, not just to fly through it. Airlines do that every day, but when you're landing and parking and those huge pieces of metal get completely cold soaked, all those computers completely freeze up. In order to be stationed up there and then to get everything going and go do a military operation and then come back, it's a totally different game. And the Russians have, the real estate where that's what they've been doing since the beginning of time. But the United States, not so much. We have Alaska, and we have a lot of NATO allies that have that type of real estate, but it's still kind of a newer thing to think about that being the primary place where we might fight next. And so we did several exercises inside the Arctic Circle in Norway, Norwegian Sea, different things were going on, getting kind of as close to the Russian border as we could, kind of safely, given the political situation at the time. There's a lot of exercises with the Baltic states. And then since I've left, Finland has joined NATO, and that's another multi-100-mile border there. So Greenland to me just was a continuation of everything we were looking at and talking about for, over a decade now, and opening up what we can do in a place and what we can permanently position there, whether it be sensors and radars to kind of have an idea of what the Russian Federation's movements might be or what they're looking at, and just and getting our forces more familiar with that type of thing by having places we can be more frequently. It makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know what that looks like as far as the political landscape, but just having it as a closer ally and a place where we can go more readily and have another, essentially line of defense where you've got an immovable piece of land that they have to get through, where we have Americans there ready to defend before it comes to the homeland. in Canada, and then down, if that's the shortest route, at least, is over that North Pole.
Yeah.
I think it makes a lot of sense. And whether we do that through allies or we do that through acquisitions or anything, it'll make our homeland safer.
Yeah. The conditions up there, they can learn how to operate the machines, the aircraft, and they can learn how to train there more safely.
Exactly.
Now, how did your service affect your family while you were gone?
I married my wife when I was in pilot training. We knew each other when I was a cadet at the academy. So she kind of came on board, knowing that she was along for the ride in some ways. It was, for me, maybe unlike previous generations, it wasn't a short chapter of as a very young man where I would go away and then just come back. For me, it was looking at more of a career. And so she I don't think she knew what she was signing up for, but she was a willing party to whatever that would be. And so she put some of her education plans on pause. She put her career, restarted her career several times as we moved around to completely different places. Now she stays home with our children. We have 3 boys, but we had children a little bit later, just knowing that, I'm going to be picking up and going. And even if I'm not deployed, I'm out of town. And so we kind of just wanted to have our kids' memories be at a point where I would be around a little bit more. So I think it was more challenging once the boys started coming along, especially that assignment in England where there were multiple instances of me getting a phone call at dinner and then being gone before breakfast. That was pretty tough, where she's now in a different country and it has children. All the plans just are canceled and I'm gone the next morning. So that part, she was ready. We enjoyed our time there, but she was also ready to come back and make the home life look a little bit more typical.
What would you do if one of your sons wanted to go into the Air Force?
I probably wouldn't encourage or dissuade him either direction, although I would leverage my relationships and just knowledge from having done it to help him be successful. But if any of them wanted to do that, you really need to be successful. I feel like you need an intrinsic motivation you need to have the why be from within and not from what someone else wants you to do, because there's so much sacrifice and just the level of commitment to do it safely and effectively and not get yourself killed or somebody else killed. You can't be living out someone else's dream. So while I think it would be interesting to see how they do, in the same career path that I might have done, I'm not going to push them and make them feel like, oh, this is where Dad wants me to go or whatever.
That's a good decision. I can't imagine they're not going to want to fly at least.
I think one of them probably will.
That's great. Have you seen changes in the United States since you're beginning to now?
I'd say yes and no. Probably I was actually thinking about this today, just reading something. I was really in a bubble in these really small Air Force towns, and you're so focused on kind of what you're doing that you don't really, at least for me, I kind of tuned out any kind of public discourse about the military, the rightness or wrongness of being involved in a certain area. That wasn't really my responsibility or role. It was to salute smartly and go do what we were asked to do, and then someone else decides whether that's worthwhile or not. I think I have noticed probably since the withdrawal from Afghanistan that there's the military, at least growing up and then being in it as a junior officer, it felt very apolitical to me. Like everyone knew that they had their own political views about what the military should be doing or what the United States should be doing abroad. But everyone relatively kind of on the same page about it. We're all volunteers and we're here to get the job done. And that's kind of all that matters while we're at work. But it does seem like there's been an erosion with seeing the way that we withdrew from Afghanistan and how many lives were lost in the process of doing that. And then the discussions with senior leadership since then, that there's maybe an eroding of that apolitical nature of it. Maybe just the officer corps, but there just seems to be more of a willingness for people to speak up or speak out and express personal views about things, when typically I would say that's not the best for the effectiveness of a military organization, or rather than looking at things that looking at the differences between us or things that we think differently about. We're really I always thought it was best to think about what makes me similar to my co-pilot. What on our crew of pilots and flight engineers binds us together. What shared experiences do we have that we can operate more effectively? What do we have across our entire squadron that makes us unique and more tightly knit? So that emphasis on the differences and the kind of appetite for people to maybe even encouragement in some corners to speak out about those, I don't think is great for the long run. And I've noticed that more. And maybe that's just because I'm out of it now too. And I'm just hearing the civilian dialogue, in the different places I'm at too. It just seems like it's been a shift, and hopefully it goes back to where it was before. I think
some
that's
of it can
probably
be social media.
Yeah, there's probably just a greater awareness of what's going on in different places than there had been too.
I tend to think that I was never in the military. I never even thought about going into the military. And what gives me the right to criticize the military? So I've not been there. I've not done that. I've not had that job. It'd be like me criticizing an accountant. So, as long as I have checks, I have money. No, but that makes a lot of sense. If you had it to do over again, would you do it?
Yeah, I would definitely. There was a few things I might do a little bit more efficiently or more effectively, but I got to do more than I ever sought out to do or set out to do as an 18-year-old, what I thought was possible, and then getting to know what the military does or what the special operations community does, getting to do all of those things and more than just because of the timing of, just being dumb luck and being in the right place at the right time. So I would absolutely do it over again. Also knowing now on the backside of the opportunity as I have in the civilian world and knowing that I've got a great, healthy family and where we're at, it's obviously worked out.
That really helps. That really helps. Has your service inspired others like your sisters?
My sister, yeah, we're pretty close friends, and they always tell me they're proud of me. But it's hard to tell because I know that they would say that no matter what.
But did it inspire them or somebody else to go into the military?
I don't know if I've directly impacted someone's decision to go into the military. I've gotten in the role I have now, just mentoring and kind of teaching cadets at the academy, just giving them a wider understanding of what different jobs in the military, what I thought the military did, as a high schooler, and then what I thought pilots did, even as a cadet. It's just constantly evolving as you become wiser and have a deeper understanding of how everything fits together. So I think, if nothing else, hopefully I've been able to help just broaden that exposure, or like the understanding of how our government works, how our government uses the military to get things done, and the different types of roles that you can play over an Air Force career with that. With some of the students I have.
You've contributed so much to so many, and the accomplishments that you've had because you set your mind that you were going to fly one of those things and you did it. It just shows what willpower is. I mean, you're right. It has to come from within. From the bottom of my heart, I do thank you for your service.
Absolutely.
If you are a veteran, or if you know someone who is, I urge you to share your story. Whether you fought in battle or worked behind the scenes, your experience matters. It's not just history, it's our history. It's a history we cannot afford to lose. At Legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel, we are committed to preserving these stories, but we need your help. Subscribe to this podcast, share it with your friends and family, and most importantly, if you have a story to tell, reach out to us on social media or email. Both are listed in our description. Every veteran story deserves to be heard, remembered, and honored. So join us in this journey. Together, we can ensure that the legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel live on. This is Diana Mall Halstead, Big Creeky's daughter, signing off. Thank you for listening, and to all veterans, thank you from the bottom of my heart for your service and your sacrifice. If you would like to purchase a copy of my dad's memoir, Writings from the Barbed Wire Hotel, click the link in the description. In the back of almost 800 pages is an index of all the sources I used to research my dad's military career and time as a prisoner of war. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Let's spread the word and keep these stories alive. And remember, every story matters, especially yours. Legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel was written by and produced by Diana Mall Halstead, the Kriege's daughter. Until next time, this is Legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel. Stay safe, stay strong, and never forget the sacrifices made for our freedom. Thanks for listening.